On a quiet Tuesday morning in November, an elderly man in a faded military cap slowly climbed the steps of Providence Municipal Court. His hands trembled as he gripped the railing, but there was unmistakable dignity in his posture,
Where are the
the
points
kind
now
that
on the
comes
beat?
from decades of military discipline and the weight of carrying something profound. William Patterson, 72 years old, looked like thousands of other veterans who had appeared before Judge Frank Caprio over 4 decades. A parking ticket, a minor infraction, another routine case in a courtroom famous for compassion. But what William was about to reveal, what he had hidden beneath his sleeve for 20 years, would become one of the most emotionally devastating moments in Judge Caprio's legendary career. This is the story of a promise made in the dust of Iraq, a tattoo that became a living memorial, and a secret so sacred that a veteran chose to carry unbearable pain rather than break his word to a dying friend. Providence Municipal Court had settled into its familiar rhythm on November 8th. Judge Caprio, now 86 years old, had seen everything in his 4 decades on the bench. Every excuse, every hardship, every human story that brought people through his courtroom doors. At 10:23 a.m., something different walked through those doors. William Patterson moved slowly but deliberately down the courthouse aisle. At 72, he still carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career military man, though time and circumstances had clearly taken their toll. His Vietnam veteran baseball cap was faded but clean. His khaki pants were pressed, his white shirt tucked in despite the slight tremor in his hands. But it wasn't just his military appearance that caught Judge Caprio's attention. There was something in William's eyes, a weight that went beyond the anxiety most defendants showed. This was a man carrying something heavy, something that had nothing to do with parking tickets. Court reporter Lisa Martinez, who had documented Judge Caprio's cases for 18 years, noticed William immediately. Unlike other defendants who fidgeted or whispered to companions, William sat in complete stillness, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Occasionally, he touched his left forearm through his shirt sleeve in what seemed like an unconscious gesture. Veterans have a way of recognizing each other. Several defendants nodded respectfully in his direction, but William seemed lost in his own thoughts, his eyes distant in a way that suggested he was seeing something far beyond the courtroom walls. At 10:45 a.m., Bailiff Officer Santos called the case. State of Rhode Island versus William Robert Patterson, case number 2022, PV 9156, illegal parking in a handicapped zone. William stood with the careful precision of someone whose body had been through wars, but whose discipline remained intact. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had made him beloved. "William Robert Patterson, Your Honor." His voice was steady, but quiet, with the clipped cadence of career military and just a trace of a Boston accent that suggested he'd been in Rhode Island for decades. "Mr. Patterson, according to the citation, you parked in a handicapped space at the VA Medical Center on October 15th without proper identification. How do you plead to this charge?" "Guilty, Your Honor," William said without hesitation. "I parked illegally and I accept responsibility." Judge Caprio paused. The VA Medical Center detail had caught his attention, and combined with William's obvious veteran status, he sensed there was more to the story. "Mr. Patterson, I notice your veteran's cap. Which branch of service?" "Army, Your Honor. Served 2 tours in Iraq, 2003 to 2007. William's posture straightened slightly as he spoke about his service, the pride evident despite whatever pain he carried. Judge Caprio felt the familiar stirring of respect and curiosity. In his decades on the bench, he had learned that veterans often carried stories that went far beyond the simple cases that brought them to court. "Mr. Patterson, can you explain the circumstances that led to this parking violation? The citation indicates you were at the VA Medical Center." William's composed expression flickered for the first time. Judge Caprio saw something pass across his face. Not shame or defiance, but something that looked like barely controlled grief. Your Honor, I was there for my monthly appointment with the VA psychologist. The parking lot was full, and I couldn't walk the additional distance from the regular parking. My hands were shaking too badly that day. Judge Caprio noticed the tremor in William's hands as he spoke. But more than that, he caught the weight in the veteran's voice when he mentioned his psychological appointment. Mr. Patterson, if you don't mind me asking, do you have a disability that would qualify you for handicapped parking? William was quiet for a long moment. Judge Caprio could see him wrestling with how much to share in a public courtroom. When he finally spoke, his voice carried decades of pain. Your Honor, I have PTSD from my service in Iraq. The courtroom went completely quiet. This wasn't about a parking ticket anymore. This was about a veteran's struggle with invisible wounds and his pride in not wanting to be seen as disabled. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. Something in William's demeanor, the way he kept touching his left forearm, the distant look in his eyes, the careful way he chose his words, suggested there was much more to his story. Mr. Patterson, 20 years is a long time to be dealing with PTSD. Can you tell me what happened during your service that led to these ongoing challenges? William's hand moved involuntarily to his left forearm again, and Judge Caprio noticed the gesture was becoming more frequent as the conversation deepened. Your Honor, I was a squad leader in the Army's 1st Infantry Division. My unit was responsible for convoy security and patrol operations in the Anbar province. On March 15, 2006, my squad was conducting a routine patrol when we encountered an IED attack. The courtroom fell completely silent, except for the sound of people holding their breath. Your Honor, I lost my entire squad that day. 7 men under my command. 7 soldiers who trusted me to bring them home safely. William's voice began to crack for the first time. Judge Caprio could see 20 years of survivor's guilt pouring out. I was thrown clear of the blast, but my men, they didn't make it. I was the only survivor, and for 20 years I've been asking myself why I lived when they didn't. Judge Caprio felt tears threatening as he processed the devastating weight of William's confession. This man had been carrying the guilt of surviving when his soldiers died for 2 decades. Mr. Patterson, I can see this is incredibly difficult to talk about. Is this why you've been seeing the VA psychologist for 20 years? Yes, Your Honor. But talking about it has never made it easier. Every month I go to that appointment, and every month. Mr. Patterson, Judge Caprio interrupted gently, I've noticed you keep touching your left arm. Is there something there that's connected to what you're sharing with us? William looked up at Judge Caprio with surprise and something that might have been relief. For 20 years, he had been carrying something that apparently no one had ever asked about directly. Your Honor, after I came home from Iraq, I did something that my family and the VA counselors don't know about. Something I've hidden for 20 years. The courtroom tension was palpable. Judge Caprio realized he was about to hear something William had never shared publicly. What did you do, Mr. Patterson? William slowly began rolling up his left sleeve, his hands shaking more noticeably now. As the fabric moved up his arm, intricate black tattoo work became visible. Your Honor, I had all 7 of their names tattooed on my arm. Every single soldier who died under my command. Their names, their ages, the date they died, and a small cross for each one. The courtroom gasped collectively as William revealed a memorial tattoo that covered his entire forearm. 7 names in elegant script, each surrounded by military insignia and crosses, creating a permanent tribute to his fallen soldiers. The names were written with profound care. SGT Marcus Thompson, 22 CPL David Chen, 24 SPC James Rodriguez, 21 PFC Michael O'Brien, 19 SPC Ahmed Hassan, 23 PFC Tyler Washington, 20 SPC Daniel Murphy, 25, all followed by the same date, March 15, 2006. But that's not all, Your Honor. William reached into his wallet with trembling fingers and pulled out a small, worn photograph. This is Sergeant Marcus Thompson. He was my point man, my closest friend in the unit. 22 years old, married to his high school sweetheart, had a baby, daughter he never got to meet. Judge Caprio could see that the photograph had been carried for so long that it was worn almost transparent at the edges. Your Honor, Marcus made me promise something right before we went out on that final patrol. He said, "Sarge, if something happens to me, promise me you'll never let people forget us. Promise me you'll remember all of us." William's voice broke completely, and 20 years of held-back grief came pouring out. "I promised him, Your Honor. I looked him in the eyes and I promised. And 3 hours later, he was gone. They were all gone." Judge Caprio felt his own eyes filling with tears. The courtroom had gone completely silent except for the sound of people quietly crying. "Mr. Patterson, have you told your VA psychologist about this tattoo? About the promise you made?" "No, Your Honor. Every month when I see Dr. Morrison, she asks me about survivor's guilt and why I can't move forward. But I can't tell her about the tattoos or the photograph or the promise because then she'd want me to let go of Marcus and the others. But letting go would mean breaking my promise." Judge Caprio realized he was witnessing one of the most heartbreaking examples of loyalty and love he had ever encountered. William Patterson had been carrying not just survivor's guilt, but the weight of a sacred promise to never forget his fallen brothers. "Mr. Patterson, on the day you received this parking ticket, what was your state of mind during your VA appointment?" "Your Honor, it was the 20th anniversary of the IED attack. Dr. Morrison was pushing harder than usual for me to move forward and accept that it wasn't my fault. But how can I move forward when I promised Marcus I'd never forget? How can I accept it wasn't my fault when I was the squad leader?" William's hand moved to his forearm again, this time pulling his sleeve up further to reveal more of the memorial tattoo. "Your Honor, after my appointment that day, I was so shaken that I could barely walk. My hands were trembling worse than usual, and I couldn't see clearly through my tears. I just needed to get to my car before I completely broke down. That's why I parked in the handicapped space, not because I wanted special treatment, but because I was falling apart and couldn't walk any further." Judge Caprio stood up from his bench, something he rarely did during proceedings. The weight of William's story had moved him beyond the formal constraints of his judicial role. "Mr. Patterson, in 40 years on this bench, I have never encountered a story that so perfectly illustrates the true meaning of brotherhood, loyalty, and sacrifice." He walked around his bench to address William directly, abandoning his position of authority to speak to him as one human being recognizing another's profound dedication. "You have spent 20 years honoring a promise you made to a dying friend. You have carried their memory not just in your heart, but literally on your body. You have turned yourself into a living memorial." Judge Caprio's voice rose with moral conviction, carrying the passion that had made his courtroom famous for moments of profound humanity. "Mr. Patterson, I want everyone in this courtroom to understand what we're really looking at here. We're looking at a man who has kept a sacred promise for 20 years, even when it meant carrying unbearable pain. We're looking at someone who chose to honor his fallen brothers every single day, regardless of the personal cost." He paused, letting his words carry to everyone present. "Furthermore, I want to address what happened to you at the VA that day. You were not seeking special treatment or trying to avoid consequences. You were a man dealing with the 20th anniversary of losing 7 soldiers under your command, and you were falling apart in the parking lot of the very building where you'd been told to forget them. Mr. Patterson, regarding the parking violation that brought you to my courtroom, all charges are dismissed. All fines are waived. This citation is being removed from your record." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause, but Judge Caprio raised his hand. "But more than that, I want you to know something. The promise you made to Sergeant Thompson, that was not a burden you should carry in secret. That was a sacred vow that honors everything that's right about military brotherhood." Judge Caprio turned toward the gallery, addressing everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a society that tells veterans to move on and get over their experiences. But William Patterson shows us that some promises are too sacred to break, and some memories are too important to forget." The applause continued as Judge Caprio made one final statement. "Mr. Patterson, I want you to go back to Dr. Morrison and show her that tattoo. I want you to tell her about the promise you made to Marcus Thompson, because honoring your fallen brothers is not something you need to hide. It's something the rest of us need to understand and respect." 6 months later, William returned to the courthouse, not as a defendant, but to thank Judge Caprio and share something remarkable. He had started a nonprofit organization called Promises Kept Memorial Inc., which creates memorial tattoos for other veterans who want to honor fallen comrades. His VA psychologist, Dr. Morrison, now understood his mission and was helping him use his story to help other survivors process their grief. The organization had already helped more than 50 veterans create permanent tributes to their fallen brothers and sisters. William had found a way to honor his promise to Marcus, while also helping others find peace with their own survivor's guilt. "Judge Caprio gave me permission to stop hiding," William told a reporter. "He showed me that my promise to Marcus wasn't a burden. It was a mission, and now I'm helping other veterans turn their pain into purpose." Dr. Morrison later wrote an article about William's case in a military psychology journal, arguing that traditional approaches to PTSD treatment sometimes fail to account for the sacred promises and bonds that warriors form. William's story became a case study in honoring grief, rather than simply trying to erase it. William Patterson's story reveals something essential about memory, loyalty, and the true cost of war. For 20 years, he carried his promise in silence, believing that his memorial tattoo was something shameful, something that proved he couldn't move on. But Judge Caprio understood what William's therapists hadn't. Some promises aren't meant to be broken. Some memories aren't meant to be forgotten. And healing doesn't always look like letting go. The 7 names on William's arm weren't holding him back from life. They were the reason he kept living. Every morning when he woke up, he saw their names and remembered why he survived. Not because he deserved it more, but because someone needed to remember them. Someone needed to keep the promise. Sergeant Marcus Thompson asked William to never let people forget. And for 20 years, William kept that promise with every fiber of his being, even when it meant carrying pain that others couldn't understand. In dismissing those charges, Judge Caprio wasn't just showing mercy to a veteran. He was honoring a sacred bond that transcends law, transcends therapy, transcends our comfortable civilian understanding of what it means to serve. There's a tradition in many cultures of speaking the names of the dead so they're never truly gone. William Patterson took that tradition and made it permanent, carrying his brothers literally on his skin so that every person who saw his arm would see their names. Marcus Thompson, David Chen, James Rodriguez, Michael O'Brien, Ahmed Hassan, Tyler Washington, Daniel Murphy, 7 young men who went on patrol together on March 15, 2006. 7 families who received the worst news imaginable. 7 futures that ended in the dust of Anbar province. And 1 squad leader who refused to let them be forgotten, even when it would have been easier to move on. William Patterson proved that some promises are worth keeping for a lifetime, regardless of the cost. He showed us that healing doesn't always mean forgetting, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to let go. He served his country in one of the most dangerous theaters of war in modern history. But his greatest service began after he came home, when he chose to honor his fallen brothers every single day for 20 years. That's not just loyalty. That's love that transcends death itself. In the end, William Patterson understood something profound. He didn't survive the IED attack by accident. He survived so that 7 names would never be forgotten. He survived so that somewhere, someone would remember that these weren't just statistics, but sons and husbands and fathers and friends. He survived to keep a promise. And for 20 years, through trembling hands and silent tears, through parking lot breakdowns and hidden tattoos, he did exactly that. Now, thanks to Judge Caprio's compassion and William's courage in sharing his story, that promise has expanded beyond one man's arm. It lives in every veteran who finds the courage to create their own memorial. It lives in every family member who learns that their loved one is still remembered, still honored, still loved. Marcus Thompson asked to never be forgotten. William Patterson made sure he never would be. Some promises transcend pain. Some memories demand to be kept. And some veterans carry their fallen brothers not as a burden, but as a sacred mission. William Patterson shows us that the greatest act of love is sometimes simply refusing to forget.